My sweet child, come sit beside me here on the porch. The evening light is just starting to soften, and I can hear the morning doves calling from the old oak tree. There's something I want to share with you, a story from my life that taught me more about strength and dignity than I ever thought I'd need to know. You see this little house with its cheerful yellow shutters and the garden where we planted those sunflowers together? This wasn't always my home. Once upon a time, I lived in a much bigger house with rooms that echoed and hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. But that house, beautiful as it was, became a place where my heart grew smaller each day until I almost forgot what it felt like to breathe freely. Let me tell you about when I was 50 years old, the same age as your mama is now. I had been married to your grandfather, Greg, for 27 years. Can you imagine? 27 springs and summers, autumns and winters, watching the seasons change from the same kitchen window, folding the same man's laundry, setting the same table for dinner each night. I remember that morning as clearly as if it were yesterday. The coffee was brewing, filling the kitchen with that rich, familiar smell that had greeted us every morning for decades. I was standing at the counter, the one I'd wiped down thousands of times, spreading butter on toast the way Greg liked it, thick and even to the edges. The morning light was streaming through the lace curtains I'd hung myself, casting those delicate patterns across the table where we'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many dreams. Greg came downstairs in his blue bathrobe, the one that was getting thin at the elbows, but that he refused to throw away. He sat at his usual spot, the chair facing the window so he could watch the birds at the feeder. But something was different that morning. He wouldn't look at me, not really look the way a husband looks at his wife. Instead, he stared into his coffee cup like he was searching for words in the steam that rose from it. Elaine, he said, and my name sounded strange in his mouth, formal, somehow. I think we've outgrown each other. Outgrown, like I was a dress that no longer fit, a book he'd finished reading, something to be set aside and forgotten. I stood there with the butter knife still in my hand, watching this man I'd loved since I was 23 years old tell me I was too small for his life now. You have to understand, sweetheart, I had given him my youth, my dreams, my very self. When your father Darius was born, Greg's job required him to travel, to work unpredictable hours. So I stepped back from my career at the bank, turned down the promotion I'd worked so hard for because someone needed to be home. Someone needed to pack the school lunches and help with homework and drive to piano lessons and soccer practice. Someone needed to make sure our family had roots, had stability, had love, and I was glad to be that someone. Truly I was. I found joy in the small things, in the way Darius would run to me after school with grass stains on his knees and stories tumbling from his lips. I took pride in keeping our home warm and welcoming, in making sure Greg had clean shirts for his business trips and a hot meal waiting when he returned. When Greg's mother became ill, I was the one who moved her into our guest room, who bathed her and fed her and held her hand through those long, frightening nights. For nearly 2 years, I cared for her as if she were my own mother, never complaining, never asking Greg to carry more of the burden than his guilt already placed on his shoulders. But none of that mattered the morning he sat across from me and explained, with the detached tone of someone discussing the weather, that he needed someone more lively, someone who could give him the excitement he felt he deserved. By Wednesday, there were divorce papers on that same kitchen table, legal documents with our names typed in cold black letters, reducing 27 years of marriage to clauses and stipulations. By the end of the month, he was gone, moved out while I was at work, taking only his clothes and leaving behind the echoes of a life we'd built together. But here's what broke my heart most, my dear one. I discovered he hadn't moved into an apartment or hotel room to think things through, to process what he was throwing away. No, he moved directly into another woman's arms, into another woman's bed. Bridget, from accounting. Pretty little Bridget with her bright laugh and her modern ideas, 34 years old, the same age as our Darius. Greg had introduced her to me 2 years earlier at the company Christmas party. I remember her handshake, firm and confident, and the way she smiled when she said, "So you're the famous Elaine. Greg talks about you all the time." I thought she was sweet then, maybe a little eager to please, but sweet. I never could have imagined that even as she complimented my dress and asked about my recipe for honey cornbread, she was already planning to replace me. The betrayal cut deeper than the divorce itself. It's one thing to grow apart, to realize you want different things, but it's another thing entirely to discover that while you were loyally tending your garden, someone else was secretly planting weeds, planning to choke out everything you'd nurtured. Within weeks of Greg moving out, they were posting pictures online like teenagers giddy with new love. There they were, clinking wine glasses in Napa Valley, laughing on beaches in Mexico, holding hands in restaurants I'd never been to. The man who used to say we couldn't afford fancy vacations was suddenly flush with romance and wanderlust. All it had taken was a younger woman's attention to remind him that life could be an adventure. Meanwhile, I sat alone in our house, surrounded by the furniture I'd chosen, the curtains I'd sewn, the photographs of a family that no longer existed in any meaningful way. Every room held memories that now felt like mockeries. The living room where we'd watched countless movies together. The dining room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners for relatives who now didn't know which side to choose. The bedroom where I'd comforted him through his father's death, where I'd celebrated with him when he got promotions, where I'd whispered dreams we'd apparently never shared. Your father, bless his heart, tried to stay neutral. He was 25, old enough to understand the complexities, but young enough to hope his parents might somehow work things out. "I don't want to take sides, Mom," he told me one afternoon, his voice heavy with a burden no child should carry, no matter how grown up they are. "You don't have to take sides, baby," I assured him, stroking his hair the way I used to when he was small and the world had hurt his feelings. "But I need you to know that some things are right and some things are wrong, and silence in the face of wrong doesn't make it right." Then came the morning that changed everything. I was sitting at that kitchen table again, the one that had witnessed so many of our family's moments, both joyful and painful. The mailman had just delivered a stack of bills and advertisements, the usual assortment of adult responsibilities. But there, nestled between the electric bill and a furniture store catalog, was an envelope addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter written on pink stationery, the kind you might use for baby shower invitations or thank you notes. But this wasn't a celebration or gratitude. This was an eviction notice wrapped in false politeness. "Dear Elaine," it read in looping script that probably took her 20 minutes to perfect. "Please schedule a time to collect the rest of your belongings. Greg and I are settling in, and we'd prefer to start this new chapter without interruptions. Mornings are best. Sincerely, Bridget Foster." Bridget Foster. She had taken my name, moved into my house, and now had the audacity to call me an interruption in my own story. I sat there for the longest time, that pink paper trembling in my hands. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that. Not from fear, though I felt plenty of that too. No, my hands were shaking with rage, pure, clean, righteous rage. This woman, this girl who could have been my daughter, was treating me like a pest to be managed, a problem to be scheduled around. She was living in the house I had helped choose, sleeping in the bed I had made countless times, cooking in the kitchen where I had prepared 27 years' worth of meals with love and care. But then something wonderful happened. Through my anger, through my hurt, through my disbelief, a little voice in my head whispered something that made me sit up straighter. The house was mine too, not just emotionally, not just in terms of sweat and tears and memories, legally mine. My name was still on the deed, still on the mortgage. Greg, in his eagerness to start his new life, had never bothered with the messy business of buying me out or refinancing. I picked up the phone and called Monica, my dearest friend since college, who had become a lawyer and had watched my marriage from the sidelines with the concerned eye of someone who loved me. When I read her Bridget's letter, she was quiet for a long moment. "Elaine, honey," she said finally, her voice taking on that careful tone lawyers use when they're about to deliver news that will change everything. "Do you still have your name on the deed?" "Yes," I said. "Greg said refinancing was too much hassle." "And he never bought you out of your half?" "No." Another pause, longer this time. "Elaine, you still legally own half that house. You don't have to ask for anything. You can force a sale." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means if they can't afford to buy you out at fair market value, they'll have to leave." I looked out the window at the roses I'd planted the spring before, still blooming despite everything that had changed. They were beautiful, those roses, hardy and persistent, continuing to grow even when the world around them shifted. "Do it," I said. Greg called me 2 days later, his voice tight with disbelief and what I recognized as panic, though he was trying to hide it. "Elaine, did you really hire a lawyer?" "Yes." "Why would you do that? What's the point of making this harder than it has to be?" "You already made it hard," I replied, my voice steady as stone. "I'm just returning the favor." He tried all his old tricks then, the emotional manipulation that had worked so well during our marriage. He told me I was being bitter, that I needed to move on, that Bridget felt uncomfortable with me lurking around. That last part almost made me laugh. Lurking around my own house, the house I'd helped pay for, the house where I'd raised his son and cared for his mother. "Then maybe she shouldn't be living in a house that still has my name on the title," I said, and hung up before he could respond. The legal process moved forward with the unstoppable momentum of justice. Monica filed all the proper paperwork, every form filled out with the precision of someone who understood that details matter, that crossing every T and dotting every I could be the difference between victory and defeat. I'll never forget the day I went to collect my things, not because Bridget had demanded it, but because I wanted to see what they'd done to my sanctuary, my refuge, my home. I used my key. Greg had never bothered to change the locks, another oversight that spoke to his assumptions about my passivity, my willingness to disappear quietly into whatever small corner of life he'd decided I deserved. Walking into that house was like visiting a familiar place in a dream where everything is almost right but somehow wrong. The bones of the house were the same, the hardwood floors I'd chosen, the crown molding we'd installed together during a rare weekend when he wasn't traveling. But everything else felt foreign, sterile. The warm colors I'd loved, the deep blues and soft golds that made every room feel like an embrace, had been painted over with trendy grays and stark whites. My family photographs, pictures of Darius's graduations and our anniversary dinners and quiet Sunday mornings, had been replaced with generic inspirational quotes in metallic frames. Love, laugh, love, and good vibes only, and home is where the heart is. as if authentic emotion could be purchased and hung on a wall. Bridget came downstairs wearing one of Greg's old t-shirts, the very one I'd bought him for Father's Day 3 years ago. She stopped when she saw me, her face flushing with surprise and indignation. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "I came to get my things," I said, holding up her pink letter like evidence in a trial. "You did say to schedule a time." "You're supposed to call first. We have boundaries now." I walked past her, calm as a summer morning, and began gathering the few items I wanted to keep. Some books, a necklace that had been my mother's, a ceramic bowl Darius had made in elementary school art class. Not much, really. Most of what mattered in that house was embedded in the walls, the memories and the years, and no one could pack those in boxes. Bridget followed me from room to room like an anxious shadow, her arms crossed, her foot tapping with impatience. I could feel her judgment, her assessment of my clothes, my age, my right to exist in what she now considered her domain. Finally, she couldn't contain herself any longer. Under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear, she whispered, "Pathetic." I stopped packing and turned to face her. "Excuse me?" She straightened up, emboldened by her own cruelty. "You couldn't hold on to your husband, so now you're playing petty games. You're jealous because he wanted someone better." I looked at this young woman with her smooth skin and her confident posture and her complete inability to understand what she'd stepped into. "Better doesn't last," I said quietly. "And I'm not playing games. I'm just claiming what's mine." That night, Monica called with news that would change everything. The court had accepted our partition action. Greg and Bridget were being officially notified that they had 60 days to either buy me out at fair market value or prepare for the house to be sold. "Do you want me to tell you how much they'd need to pay?" Monica asked. "How much?" "About $370,000 for your half." We both knew they didn't have that kind of money. Greg's salary was comfortable but not extravagant, and Bridget had quit her job to play house. They'd been living off his income and whatever savings they had, burning through money on their romantic getaways and their house redecorating projects. Greg called me 4 times the next day. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to desperate. "Elaine, what are you doing? This is insane. You're forcing us to sell the house. You know we can't afford to buy you out right now." On the 3rd day, I finally picked up the phone. "Elaine, we need to talk." "So talk. Why are you doing this? You know this will ruin us." "You mean forcing a sale of a house I still legally own?" "You know we can't afford to buy you out right now. This isn't fair." "Fair?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Was it fair when you moved her into my house before our divorce was even final? Was it fair when she sent me a letter on pink paper telling me when I could collect my own belongings?" His voice changed then, becoming softer, more like the man I'd once loved. "Elaine, you don't need this kind of stress. You don't need the drama." "No," I said, "you don't. But you brought it on yourself." The house went on the market within 2 weeks. At first, they tried to handle the sale themselves, hoping to avoid agent fees and maybe rush through a quick undermarket deal. But Monica had made sure that wouldn't happen. Any sale had to be at fair market value, with proper inspections and standard procedures. No shortcuts, no family favors, no backdoor deals. I drove by once during those 60 days just to see the "for sale" sign on the lawn where I'd once planted tulip bulbs that came back every spring. The yard looked neglected, the flower beds I'd tended for years now overgrown with weeds. It made me sad, not for myself, but for the house itself, which deserved better than to be treated as a commodity, a problem to be solved.
Through Darius, I heard that the stress was taking its toll on Greg and Bridget's relationship. They were fighting constantly, he told me, each blaming the other for their predicament. Bridget had apparently asked Greg why he hadn't handled his ex-wife properly, as if I were a loose thread that should have been trimmed away cleanly. When the offer came in, full asking price from a young couple expecting their first child, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: pure joy. Not because Greg and Bridget would have to leave, though that was certainly satisfying, but because the house would be loved again. It would hear laughter and crying and the chaos of family life. It would be a home again, not just a stage set for someone's midlife crisis. The closing was scheduled for the following month. Greg had to vacate the property completely 3 days before the final papers were signed. I imagine those last nights were difficult ones, sleeping in rooms that no longer belonged to them, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of choices that had led them there. I didn't attend the closing. Monica handled everything for me, bringing me the check later that afternoon. $370,000. More money than I'd ever seen at one time, earned not through luck or inheritance but through patience, through knowing my worth, through understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is exactly what you're legally entitled to do. That evening, Greg appeared at my apartment door. I'd been expecting him, really. He looked smaller somehow, deflated, like a balloon the day after a party. The confidence that had carried him through his affair and his divorce and his new marriage had evaporated, leaving behind just a middle-aged man who'd made spectacular miscalculations. "I came to ask you something," he said. I didn't invite him in. "What? Can you help us with the deposit on our new place? We're short, and I thought maybe..." The audacity took my breath away. "You thought what, Greg?" "I thought you might understand that we had no idea you'd go this far. We thought you'd stay quiet, like always." "I'm not quiet anymore," I said, "and I'm not your safety net." He shifted from foot to foot, uncomfortable in his own skin. "Bridget's staying with her sister. I'm in a hotel. I didn't think it would end like this." "You ended it," I reminded him. "You made your choices. You moved her into my house before our divorce was even final. You let her treat me like an intruder in my own story." He looked genuinely hurt then, as if he'd expected our 27 years of marriage to count as credit against this debt. "We were in love." "Love doesn't steal," I said. "Love doesn't lie, and love damn sure doesn't send pink letters asking someone to schedule their own humiliation." He stood there for a long moment, and I could see him processing the reality of what he'd lost. Not just me, not just the house, but the entire foundation of stability he'd taken for granted. The woman who'd managed his life, who'd absorbed his moods, who'd made his world smaller and more manageable simply by taking care of all the details he didn't want to handle.
When he left, walking slowly to his car like a man much older than his years, I didn't feel victory. I felt completion. The circle was closed, the debt was paid, the lesson was learned. I used that money to buy this little house where we're sitting now, sweet child. Every board and nail and window pane belongs completely to me. No shared deed, no co-signatures, no complications, just clean ownership and clear conscience. But I did something else with that money too. Something that gave me more satisfaction than any material purchase could have. I donated $50,000 to a women's legal fund anonymously with a note that said, "For the women who don't yet know they're allowed to fight back." The fund director later wrote in their newsletter that the donation had helped 3 women escape abusive marriages and file lawsuits that changed their lives. That's when I understood that my story wasn't really about revenge. It was about restoration. Not just for me, but for every woman who's been told she's too old, too boring, too used up to deserve respect. You see, my darling, I learned something important during those months of legal battles and sleepless nights and conversations with lawyers. I learned that there's a difference between being quiet and being weak. I'd spent so many years being accommodating, being understanding, being the one who bent so others wouldn't have to break. I'd mistaken that flexibility for strength, But real strength sometimes means refusing to bend at all. Greg and Bridget taught me that lesson, though I doubt they meant to. They showed me what happens when you mistake someone's gentleness for helplessness, their loyalty for stupidity, their love for weakness. They bet against the wrong woman, and they lost everything because of that miscalculation. I still get Christmas cards from Darius, who eventually understood that staying neutral in the face of injustice is really just choosing the side of the oppressor. He brings his children to visit now, your cousins who love to hear their grandmother tell stories about courage and consequences. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did, if I think I went too far. But regret requires believing you've done something wrong, and I did nothing wrong. I simply used the law to protect what was legally mine. I didn't lie, cheat, steal, or manipulate. I just refused to disappear quietly when someone decided I was inconvenient. Greg remarried Bridget in a small ceremony I heard about through mutual acquaintances. They moved to a rental apartment in a complex with thin walls and shared laundry facilities. Last I heard, they were still there, still arguing about money, still wondering how the woman they'd underestimated had outmaneuvered them so completely. Bridget sent me one final letter about 6 months after the house sold. No pink stationery this time, just plain white paper and handwriting that looked hurried, desperate. She wrote that I'd ruined their lives, destroyed their happiness, forced them into a smaller existence than they deserved. I read the letter once, folded it neatly, and filed it away with all the other legal documents from that time. Not because I treasured her words, but because I wanted to remember the moment when someone who'd tried to erase me realized they'd only made me stronger. The truth is, my sweet child, they didn't ruin anything. They revealed everything. They showed me who I really was beneath all those years of compromise and accommodation. They showed me that I had power I'd never accessed, strength I'd never tested, dignity I'd never fully claimed. Now I wake up every morning in this little house with its cheerful kitchen and its garden full of flowers I chose. I make my coffee exactly the way I like it, strong and dark with just a touch of cream. I read books that interest me, not ones I think I should read. I travel when and where I want to go, not where someone else thinks would be nice. Most importantly, I never again make myself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. I learned that lesson at 50, which some might think is late in life to discover your own worth, but I think it's exactly the right time. Old enough to understand the weight of the knowledge, young enough to enjoy the freedom it brings. That's why I'm telling you this story, little one. Not because I want you to plan revenge against anyone who hurts you, but because I want you to know that you never have to disappear just because someone decides you're inconvenient. You never have to shrink just because someone wants more room. You never have to be quiet just because someone finds your voice annoying. The world will try to teach you that being accommodating is the same as being good, that keeping peace is more important than demanding justice. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to stand firm in your truth and let the consequences fall where they may. Greg and Bridget thought they were getting rid of an obstacle when they tried to push me out of my own story. Instead, they created a testament to the power of a woman who finally understands her worth. They thought they were writing my ending, but they were really writing my beginning. And what a beautiful beginning it's been, my dear one. What a beautiful, powerful, joyful beginning. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that remind me why I chose this little house, why I planted this garden, why I built this life with my own hands and my own heart. Tomorrow I'll wake up in a bed that belongs completely to me, in a house where every decision is mine alone, surrounded by the peaceful quiet of a woman who no longer has to fight for her right to exist. That's the real victory, sweetheart. Not the money, not the house, not even the satisfaction of watching people face the consequences of their choices. The real victory is the peace that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself when it mattered most, that you chose dignity over convenience, truth over comfort, justice over false peace. Remember this story, my precious child. Remember it not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in the quiet power of knowing your worth and refusing to settle for less than you deserve. The world needs more women like that. Women who love deeply but never at the expense of their own souls. Women who are kind but never weak. Women who understand that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is teach someone the cost of taking you for granted. Now come, let's go inside and make some tea. I want to hear about your day, about your dreams, about all the beautiful possibilities waiting in your future. And maybe, if you're interested, I'll show you some of the legal documents from that time, not because I'm proud of the conflict, but because I'm proud of the woman who finally learned to fight for herself. That woman is your grandmother, and she loves you more than all the stars in the sky.